Good evening and welcome to tonight's event, Voices of Occupation, Stories of Cultural Survival, showcasing Olia Hercules, Volodymyr Rafeyenko, and Natalia Shpylova-Saeed. My name is Ali Weissman, and I'm a librarian at Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, World Languages Collection, and your host this evening. Before I make general introduction, I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and Razom for Ukraine, and especially Maria Genkin for making this program possible. On a slightly different note, I would like to remind everyone that if you are still not a proud owner of our library card, it is easy to get one by speaking with my colleagues at the information desk on this floor or at any information desk in our building. Finally, I would like to encourage everyone to visit our library's website, the New York Public Library, and take a look at other upcoming programs at our branch. We have many offerings, including author talks, writing workshops, music, dance, and more. We would love to have you join us at Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library again. And, of course, a few words about the key culprit of today's event, Maria Genkin. Maria serves on the board of Razom for Ukraine, a leading Ukrainian-American nonprofit focused on Ukraine. Maria co-founded and manages Razom Book Club and Razom Translates, a program to bring more Ukrainian literature to American audience. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our esteemed colleague, Maria Genkin, to the microphone. Maria, please.
Thank you very much, Eli, for this wonderful introduction, a little bit unexpected. First and foremost, I would actually like to return thanks to Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library and to LA specifically, and tell you a little bit why this location and this relationship is so important to us. Eli actually wrote to us 2 years ago and told us that they want to do a Ukrainian event, and I was so excited to plan it with him. And this is actually how Ukrainian Cultural Festival started, because we had this event and we decided to plan other events around it. So you're truly now 2 years later at this birthplace for the Ukrainian Cultural Festival. This year is our third festival. It's a full month of events. We're in day 24 of the festival, so we're pretty tired, but we still have a lot of events left. And there are several literature events, so please go on our site and check out, what's remaining, and please come. We'll be very happy to see you. And of course, we would be happy to see you because the urgency to share Ukrainian voices has only increased in these 3 years. The war is still going on, the cities are attacked daily, and our society here in America and in the Western world is really tired to hear about it, so we hear about it less and less. This year, we heard voices in America, and I mean in American politics, advocating for Ukraine to accept loss of the territory. And with this event today, we hope to show that occupation is not some abstract points on the map, some cities. It is people, both the people that remained under occupation and the people that left and now have to deal with consequences of losing their home, losing their graves of their loved ones, and their memories really connected to the place. So without further ado, moderating today's event is Sophie Pinkham, and I'm going to introduce Sophie, who then will tell you a little bit more about our panelists. Sophie is a writer specializing in Soviet and post-Soviet culture, history, and politics. She's a professor of practice and in the comparative literature department at Cornell University, which is my alma mater, so I'm a little bit biased. Her writing has appeared in the New York Review of Books, New York Times, Guardian, New Yorker, Foreign Affairs, and many other places. Her first book, Black Square: Adventures in Post-Soviet Ukraine, was published in 2016, and her most recent book, The Oak and the Lark, in which she confronts the forest's role in Russia's long history of imperial conquest, is forthcoming from W.W. Norton in January 2026. Please welcome Sophie, Volodymyr, Olia, and Natalia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sophie Pinkham, and I will start by introducing our wonderful panelists tonight. Olia Hercules was born in Ukraine and lived in Cyprus before moving to the UK to study. After working as a chef for several years, she released her best-selling and award-winning debut cookbook, Mamushka, in 2016. This was followed by Caucasus, Summer Kitchens, and Home Food. Following the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Hercules co-founded a movement called #CookForUkraine, which has raised over £2 million for humanitarian efforts. Strong Roots is her first memoir. Volodymyr Rafeyenko is an award-winning Ukrainian writer, poet, translator, literary, and film critic. Following the outbreak of the Russian aggression in Ukraine's east, Rafeyenko left Donetsk and moved to a town near Kiev. That town, situated between Bucha and Hostomel, trapped Volodymyr and his wife when Russian forces invaded Ukraine in 2022. Volodymyr captured that experience in his plays Signals of Being, which is forthcoming from Harvard. His 2017 novel, The Length of Days, an urban ballad, is set mostly in the composite Donbas city of Z, an uncanny foretelling of what this letter has come to symbolize since February 24th, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Natalia Shpylova-Saeed is a memory studies researcher and literary critic. She writes on cultural memory, focusing on Ukraine and Russia. Her book, Russia's Denial of Ukraine, Letters and Contested Memory, was published in 2024, and she is a co-editor of Crimean Fig, Contemporary Crimean Tatar Poetry and Fiction. Her current research project is Russia's Memory of the Past, the War Against Ukraine and the Forgotten Future. Natalia teaches Ukrainian at Harvard University in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures. So without further ado, I would like to start by asking you about the question of hope, which I think is a very important theme that runs through all of the books that we'll be discussing tonight, but in very different forms, in very different modes, one might say. So I want to ask you, under invasion, under occupation, in situations of displacement, how do we maintain hope? And here you might think about memory, about literature, about nature, and of course about delicious food. Who would like to start?
Ну, я зберігав надію, тому що я писав кожного дня щоденник і читав Вільяма Шекспіра п'єси. Кожного дня по кілька годин.
So I had hope when I was under occupation. I only retained hope because I was writing a diary every single day, and I was also reading William Shakespeare every single day.
А коли вже було дуже погано і не допомагав навіть Вільям Шекспір, то я допомагав іншим, хто був поруч зі мною жив, і кому було складніше мою.
When it was especially difficult and William Shakespeare was not helping anymore, I was trying to help people who lived close with me and who were in a more dire situation than I was.
І з тих пір для мене це правило таке абсолютно в житті працює в будь-якої ситуації. Навіть коли немає поруч російських військ, а тобі просто дуже важко, і ти не можеш справитися, то йди й допомагай іншим, кому тяжче за тебе.
This is a rule I now live by. So even if there are no Russian army stationed outside, but you are kind of feeling bad and sad, go and help somebody else.
Thank you.
Just to explain to everyone very quickly that I was I've been living in the UK for 22 years, and I was in London when the full-scale invasion happened. However, my parents, my mom and dad, Olia and Petro, were in Kakhovka, the place of my birth, a place in the south of Ukraine, which is 70 kilometers away from the Crimean border. And so my parents were in Kakhovka when the Russian tanks rolled in, and my brother was in Kyiv, and my very large extended family was also scattered all over Ukraine. And to be honest with you, the first few months were, I think we were all in such a intense state of fight or flight. I think more fight than flight for me. that I didn't even have time to think about hope or to feel anything. But once my parents were out of Kakhovka and they managed to escape, and once I knew that my brother survived the attack on Kyiv, which he helped to defend, then we kind of all breathed out a little bit. Okay, we're all alive. And I think that's when the realization came that, well, hope is an anchor and something that we must retain. Otherwise, we might as well just, there's no point in living if you don't have hope. I think that's the thing that carries us through. And I'm saying this, and of course it's not so easy. And sometimes I feel absolutely hopeless. And helpless, because also not being in Ukraine when your family is there. My dad actually eventually, they went to Europe at first, but then my dad went back. But actually speaking to my dad, speaking to my brother and other family who remain in Ukraine, and seeing their strength and them not losing that hope, I just can't not have it if they're being so strong.
And your memoir opens with this very beautiful, very touching scene of being in, I believe, Milan and preparing for your family to arrive for the first time, right? When they've just fled Ukraine, and you describe in this beautiful and also really mouth-wateringly delicious detail the process of preparing borscht for them, right? Could you just say a couple words about why it was so important to you to prepare that particular meal for their arrival?
So when my parents left, it took them about 5 days to go through Europe and to reach Italy. One of my cousins has been living he's a trauma surgeon, he's been living in Germany for a while, and he literally just bought that place in Italy, in northern Italy. It's not in Milan, but it's northern Italy. And it was one of those kind of dilapidating villas that it was plastic plants, and nobody's lived there, and it was all cold. And my parents decided to go there first, just to they thought that they'll wait out the summer and they'll be back home by the end of the summer. At least that's what they told me, that's what they were hoping for. And I just thought immediately, oh my God, I could just imagine them trying to get into this house, and it's cold, and they've just gone through so much. So I immediately flew out, and I managed to get there 6 hours before them. And I just thought, if they get inside that house, they really need to smell something that reminds them of home. And that will help them to process what had just happened to them and to recover from this horrific journey. I write in the book about how they were escaping from Kakhovka. Normally, a journey that takes an hour to get from Kakhovka to the regional center of Kherson, it takes an hour normally, and it took them 19 hours because there were 19 checkpoints, and they were stopped at every single one. It was torture. So I got there, and I just thought, okay, I really absolutely must make borscht. There was not another dish even in my head. And Italy, immediately you just think, oh gosh, do they have dill? Do they have beetroot? Do they have an old chicken that looks dinosauric, which you absolutely must have to make a really good borscht? I managed to find some of those things, and the borscht was there on in the kitchen, in the small kitchen, and the windows were covered in condensation, and there were the smells and the bubbling sounds and everything else. And I just thought, maybe I'll give them a hug, and also the sensory kind of the atmosphere of the kitchen will give them another hug and just make them feel safe.
Great, thank you. And one of the things that scene really brings out beautifully is how cooking traditions have to do, and this might be obvious, although to Americans raised on processed food, it's easy to forget about it. But cooking traditions are related to what grows in the soil around you, right? And this is a powerful theme in the collection you edited, also Natalia, of contemporary Crimean Tatar fiction and poetry. the question of just the plants that grow in your space and how that connects to memory. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is my distinct honor to speak today on behalf of Aerosmith Press, founded by Askold Melnichuk, who actually initiated this project to translate Crimean Tatar prose and poetry pieces into English. And this is actually the first Anglophone collection of contemporary Crimean Tatar literature. And it started back in 2022 because Askold Melnichuk got interested in the fate of Crimean Tatars in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And he got in touch with Alim Aliyev, who had to leave Crimea back in 2014 when the initial invasion of Russia of Ukraine started. So in its essence, the whole collection is a project of hope, is on the one hand a project of hope, and on the other hand is a collective memory project as well, for many reasons. So first of all, I ask myself, what do we hope for? And of course we do hope for deoccupation and for decolonization, but we also hope for this introduction of this culture to the world, because unfortunately there were no works written fiction works translated from Crimean Tatar into English, for instance. There were just a couple of pieces that were published in some collections, but I couldn't find more than 2. That were published back in 2012. So this writing by Crimean Tatars is some sort of hope for being understood and for being known and for being remembered. Because when they write, of course, about their own culture, about their own history, and they also talk about how the atrocities that happened centuries ago or decades ago somehow resonate today. There are topics of deportation that happened back in 1944, and there is this intention to reflect on it, but also there is some intention to process that trauma and to somehow move forward while being subject to another re-traumatization and to another recolonization by Russia today. So in many, many ways, this is a truly memory project. And another thing that I would add at this point is that with this collection, we do hope that there will be some gesture to better understand the other through entering their world. And as you pointed out, Sophia, yes, there are a lot of topics that are connected with food. And in this case, the topic of food is this connection to the land, because Crimea is a very essential and conceptual element for the writing in terms of Crimean Tatar literature. But on the other hand, it also gestures their remembrance as well, and their remembering of Crimea as actually non-Russian space. That's another thing that somehow subverts this understanding of Crimea, that it belonged always to Russia, and the whole collection is some sort of a resistance against this narrative, and is some sort of, again, showcasing Crimean Tatar culture in the way that could be appreciated and understood by many without putting this question first. What country does Crimea belong to? And I think this collection makes it very clear that Russia has always maintained the position of colonizer in the peninsula.
Thank you so much. And it's both distressing and remarkable to see that this collection that you've co-edited contains a number of writers who, if I understand correctly, are currently incarcerated, right? Or have been incarcerated.
They live in Crimea.
Yeah.
They live in Crimea. They're not incarcerated. But we did have a couple of pieces that were withdrawn because our writers were concerned about their safety. And we have some biography notes at the end, and some writers requested that we do not include their biographies because, again, they're concerned about their safety because they do live in Crimea at the at the moment.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. But yeah, it's an act of bravery just to be included in a collection of this kind at this point for writers in Crimea. Natalia, you mentioned the question of Crimean Tatars being a kind of an other. And so this question is for you and also for Volodymyr. I wonder if you could reflect further on this idea of Crimean Tatars being other, and also of Eastern Ukrainians to some extent having been, we could say othered for quite a while in Ukrainian culture, and how these two groups now can be brought into the Ukrainian national project post-Maidan and especially post-full-scale invasion.
Я думаю, що вся проблема полягає в проблемі мови. І дійсно, схід України, як і Крим, вони розмовляли останню третину, останню половину ХХ століття і початок цього століття, значить, переважно російською мовою в великих містах.
So I think you can sort of see it as a language problem, and it's true that the east of Ukraine and the Crimea, for the last half of the 20th century and the beginning of this century, have been speaking in Russian.
Але справа в тому, що ця ситуація стала такою після впровадженої, значить, радянською владою політики. По-перше, винищення україномовного населення – це 3 голодомори, що пережила і Східна Україна.
So, but you have to understand that the situation kind of became such because of the politics of the Soviet Union when it very deliberately tried to destroy the Ukrainian-speaking population and specifically the 3 Holodomors that Ukraine has survived.
По-друге, після Другої світової війни для відновлення підприємств, що дуже багато було їх промислових на сході України, це було і металургійні, і вугільні, і таке інше, ешелонами, поїздами. Цілодобово завозилися люди з Сибіру, з Казахстану і так далі в великі міста для відновлювання підприємств.
And the second reason for the situation was that after the Second World War, the industrial might of the Eastern Ukraine needed to be reborn and needed workforce, and therefore, there were a lot of incoming kind of shuttling of the labor from the Kazakhstan and from Siberia and from other Russian-speaking areas.
Таким чином склалася ситуація, коли в великих містах, значить, жили люди, для котрих єдиною спільною мовою могла бути російська.
So what happened was that the only common language these people had that came to the city was the Russian language.
При тому сільське населення все довкола цих міст доволі довго, майже до початку цієї війни, 2014 року, переважно розмовляла українською мовою, значить, східного варіанту, таким так званим суржиком.
But the countryside population, the village population, very late, really up to the start of the war with Russia, was Ukrainian speaking.
В великих містах, крім того, як Донецьк, по Донецьку знаю це абсолютно точно, на відміну від центральної і, значить, східної частини України, майже неможливо було отримати вищу освіту і нормальну роботу, якщо ти дозволяв собі спілкуватися українською.
So in big eastern cities like Donetsk, and I know this about Donetsk, very well, it was different from West Ukraine and the central Ukrainian cities because if you spoke Ukrainian, it was almost impossible to get an education and then pursue some degrees further if you were a Ukrainian speaker.
І таким чином в мої 2 бабці, скажімо, одна польська єврейська родина по мамі, вона українська і польська була рідна. І коли вона пішла в школу, вона не вміла розмовляти російською, вона мені казала, як вона плакала, бо вчителі знущалися, російськомовні завезені з Росії.
So between my 2 grandmothers, one of my grandmothers on the mother's side is actually Polish, Jewish, Ukrainian family. So her native language was Ukrainian. But once she went to school, she was asked to speak in Russian and study in Russian, and she was telling me the stories how she was crying when this was happening because she didn't speak them.
Вона пообіцяла собі, що вчить їх мову краще них самих. І в результаті вона була в тому КБ, яке розробляла перші місячні ці луноходи радянські. Вона спроєктувала їх.
She actually promised to herself that she'll learn their language better than they know it, and she ended up being an engineer and working on some lunar vehicles that the Soviets have placed on the moon.
Але з нами, з дітьми своїми онуками, вона боялася розмовляти українською, польською чи їдиш. Вона розмовляла виключно російською.
But she was afraid to speak with us, her grandchildren, in Ukrainian, or the Polish, so she only spoke Russian to us.
Друга бабця, слава Богу, відтак і не отримала вищу освіту, тому так вона спокійно розмовляла з суржиком до кінця.
But my other grandmother, who never received a higher education, was speaking, in this like Ukrainian, Russian hybrid surjik until the end.
І хоча мама моя і тато розмовляли зі мною виключно російською, приходячи в гості до бабці, я слухав казки українською мовою.
So even though my parents spoke to me only in Russian when I would visit my grandmother, I would hear the fairy tales only in Ukrainian.
Ну і звісно, що в цьому сенсі, як би не старалася радянська влада, все одно знищити українськість як таку. Пам'ять про релігійні, культурні, мовні традиції було неможливо. Я думаю, на це і потрібна була ця війна, що вони розпочали.
So of course, like no matter how hard the Soviet Union, Soviet system tried to eradicate the Ukrainianness, it wasn't quite possible to do till the end. And I think this is why the invasion has started, because they really wanted to finish erasing that identity.
Розумієте, ну от я останнє, що скажу, я пам'ятаю дуже сильно, я був маленький дуже. 6-7 років було мені. І прийшло Різдво. І нарешті бабця моя по татовій лінії, вона вирішила, що в мене вже достатньо мозку, щоб розказати про колядки. І змусити мене вивчити кілька колядок. І вона домовилась на Різдво з якимось теж україномовними людьми на нашому посілку. І я зі своїм товаришем 6-7 років, взявши за ручки, ходили по морозу 3 ночі. А нас чекали в певних домах. І коли ми співали колядки, вони плакали. А ми не розуміли, чому.
So the story that I want to tell as an illustration, my Ukrainian grandmother wanted to introduce me at certain age to Ukrainian carols, which are very famous and very cultural. So she agreed with several families in this East Donetsk town that she knew which families would be open to it. So me and my friend, who were 6 or 7 years old, hold hands, and it was very cold. It was Christmas, and we were going home from one house to another house. And in those specific houses, we were singing carols, and people were crying, and we didn't understand why that was.
Це, звісно, українська, це європейська традиція святкування певних християнських свят. Вона нам була властива, незважаючи навіть на радянську владу. Ну, я думаю, що на цьому я вже можу помовчати, бо я достатньо розказав.
This Ukrainian tradition is a really European tradition of celebrating Christmas with carols and singing, and it was still alive even under the Soviet rule.
I'll try to respond to that question with this sub-question to myself. How can one maintain their otherness while being part of the whole? And I think here again, we have to go back to the initial deportation in 1944, when the Soviet regime villainized and demonized Crimean Tatars for decades. But even after being sent to Central Asia, Crimean Tatars always wanted to come back to Crimea, even those who were already born in Central Asia, even those who never saw the Black Sea, never saw the mountains. But there was this desire to come back. And in spite of the restrictions, which were lifted at some point, but never the Crimean Tatars received any right to return, to get back their settlements, even if they managed to return to Crimea. So never once they had this sense that they were ready to lose their home. And only in 1991, when they really had this freedom to come back. Well, here we also have to remember about those things that Ukraine could have done in the 1990s, but those things were not done in order to somehow facilitate the return of the Crimean Tatars. But at that point, this kind of demonization that was established by the Soviet Union still remained quite high. And in one of my conversations with one of the Crimean Tatar representatives, I heard a very interesting statement. It was already after 2014, when he said that under Ukraine, we had that right to be Crimean Tatars. After 2014, we had to become someone else. We did it. We lose our right to be who we chose to be, who we wanted to remember to be. And I think that's part of this question, how we can accept this otherness that, of course, remains otherness, but on the other hand, it contributes to the diversity that a state or a country embraces. And in terms of this kind of perception, Ukraine, of course, is a very diverse country, and it includes all kinds of cultures and languages. And of course, well, right now, the Russian language is probably perceived in many cases as the language of the enemy or the language of the aggressor. But if we speak about the Crimean Tatars, many of them speak Russian. Of course, some of them also speak the Crimean Tatar language, not all of them, because when their families were sent to Central Asia, they had to learn the Russian language again, and it became the main language for communication. Some families preserved their language within the family, and some families didn't. So, in other words, right now it's that kind of probably the process of recovery of the language for the culture itself on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's this rebuilding of the diversity of the peninsula on the one hand, and on the other hand of the entire country as well. So in this regard, it's this process of being the other while being part of the whole, and maybe that kind of perspective can somehow help us see how it's possible to be the other while being part of a more embracing, I would say, culture that hosts many, many cultures.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. Thank you. That's also a good transition into another question I wanted to ask you all, which is about the shift into Ukrainian. Olia, you write about this very thoughtfully and beautifully in your book. And of course, this is a very important theme, Volodymyr, for your career and your trajectory as a writer. It also has resonance in the Crimean Tatar community. So I would like to hear your thoughts on language.
So, just like the east of Ukraine, the south of Ukraine was also very heavily Russified. And again, it wasn't necessarily an outright kind of like forcing of it, but as Volodymyr mentioned, you know, the Ukrainian language, just like other languages all over the USSR, was called neperspektivny, so a language with no prospects. So my parents grew up in the Mykolaievshchina region, just above Kherson, where I was born, and they remembered when they were little, if anybody in their class spoke Ukrainian, they would be teased and bullied and called Seluk or Seluchka, which means, oh, you peasant, you know, you lowly peasant. Ukrainian was the, you know, language of the peasants and neperspektivny. You will not get that into that university that you want to go, or you will not get that slightly better job than everyone else, you know. And so they spoke Russian. My grandparents spoke again Surzhyk, a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian, but they spoke Russian, and I was a Russian speaker as well. I was brought up as a Russian speaker, and I only started speaking Ukrainian 3 years ago. I've tried in 2014, as soon as the invasion actually happened back then. Me and my mom said, okay, right, we absolutely need to do it. we tried, and we just found it extremely difficult. You know, as soon as you start, even though I've understood Ukrainian my whole life, but as soon as I try to speak it, Russian words just fall out of me. And then you kind of just like, oh gosh, I just can't do it. So we just decided, okay, let's just text to each other in Ukrainian. So we started doing that back then. And then, you know, I say there's a sentence in my book that there's nothing like a genocidal war that will really spur you on to start learning your language. I don't judge those Ukrainians that don't and that keep speaking Russian. It's everybody, you know, it's their own choice. But for me, I felt that it was an act of resistance, and it was a healing act to start speaking the language of my ancestors. So I actually just sat down one day and I just thought, okay, no more excuses. Trauma or no trauma, whatever is going on, I really need to do this to make myself feel stronger. And I started reading. I started reading in Ukrainian, and I also started listening to loads of podcasts about literature and about psychology, so like things that I was really interested in. And one day, after reading Lesia Ukrainka's Boyarinya, which is this play called Noble Woman, I was just standing in the kitchen and I was chopping something, cooking, and I had my first thought in Ukrainian. And normally I think in English. I've been thinking in English since I was 17. And I just stood there, and then, you know, I wished that I could say that it was something really deep or romantic or something, but it was як це може бути, which means how can this be? That I will never forget that was my first thought in Ukrainian. And then very soon after, when I started speaking to my mom, we found it that we were actually all of a sudden it was like magic. We were just fluent. And now whenever we get, you know, speak to each other on the phone. My dad is in Ukraine, my mom is in Berlin, my brother is in Zaporizhia, and we go on the video call and we speak Ukrainian now. Even my dad, which I thought, you know, he'd never be able to switch, but we've all switched, and it makes us feel really good, really strong.
That's wonderful. Perhaps Volodymyr, would you like to?
Я до 14 року, до 45 років, не міг абсолютно розмовляти українською, і моя українська в 14-му році, це була настільки погана, значить, що я не міг навіть що на маркеті порозмовляти з кимось про продукти.
Until 2014, I did not speak Ukrainian, and my Ukrainian was so bad that I couldn't even speak to somebody in the market.
Писати, буду писати колись українською, щоб хто мені сказав би, що в 13-му році я б навіть сміятися не став, навіть заплакав би просто, бо людина божевільна абсолютно.
If somebody told me like in 2013 that at one point I'll be writing in Ukrainian, I wouldn't even laugh because I would be just thought that he's crazy. So.
Но, слава Богу, є така країна, Російська Федерація, і вона зробила неможливе.
But thankfully there is a Russian Federation and it did something impossible.
Вони почали окуповувати, значить, схід України і Крим, і робили це під гаслами захисту російськомовного населення.
When they started to occupy Crimea and the East Ukraine, they started doing it with the explanation that they're protecting the Ukrainian, the Russian-speaking population.
А я справа в тому, що і є те саме російськомовне населення.
And I was that, the Russian-speaking population.
І таким чином я став причиною війни.
That's how I became the reason for this war.
І в потязі, коли зайшли перші озброєні важкою технікою бойовики в Донецьк, це було 5 липня 2014 року. А за 2 тижні я їхав, менше ніж за 2 тижні, 12 липня я їхав в одному із останніх потягів Донецьк-Київ, кинув своїх батьків, свою квартиру, свою родину в пошуках нового життя. Я зрозумів, що мушу щось в цій ситуації робити. А що я повинен в цій ситуації мушу зробити як письменник? Ну, я вирішив вивчити українську мову не тільки на розмовному рівні, а так, щоб писати, щоб всім було ясно, що для українця навіть російськомовного українська мова не може бути проблемою.
So that when the Russian occupants came into Donetsk, which happened on the 5th of July, I was on one of the last trains out of Donetsk on the 12th of July. And as I was leaving Donetsk and leaving my parents and leaving my apartment, leaving everything behind, I was thinking, what can I do? What can I do with this? What's my role in this? And as a writer, I thought that the only way for me to react is actually learn the language on such a level that I can write in it.
На той момент я вже отримав 2 міжнародні літературні премії в Москві. Це російські премії. Мене видавали мої романи на найліпші часописи і видавництва московські. І мені якраз в цей момент за місяць, за кілька тижнів до того, як ми поїхали, запропонували безкоштовно дачу під Москвою і пообіцяли роботу. Натомість я поїхав в Київ, де в мене було нікого, кілька знайомих.
So at that point, I published in Russia in Russian and got 2 literary prizes called Russian prizes. And at that point, somebody offered me to live near Moscow at their dacha, their house, and actually have a job and be safe. But I decided against that and went to Kyiv instead.
Ну і вивчив я українську мову. Це окрема історія. І мені допомогла Російська Федерація, те, що вони робили з моїм містом і з Україною. Я розумів, що зворотнього ходу немає, що я повинен зробити те, що я повинен, хоча б заради своїх бабців, для котрих українська була рідна.
So I did learn Ukrainian. It's a whole different story altogether. But I did that, and I understand that there is no way back, and that I did what I had to do, if anything, for 2 of my grandmothers.
Ну і в 14-му році я почав вивчати українську. За 2 роки я майже її знову-таки не знав. Ну, вона була значно гірша, ніж моя англійська наразі. І я зрозумів, що оскільки щось потрібно робити, я прийняв рішення, то що я б міг зробити? І я вирішив, що я стану писати роман українською. І таким чином я винайшов нову методологію абсолютно вивчення іноземних мов. Всім раджу, хочете вивчити іноземну мову, напишіть роман.
So when I was learning Ukrainian, and I didn't know it at all, it was worse than my English. I figured, what can I do to actually learn Ukrainian? And I figured, well, let me start writing a novel in Ukrainian. So this is a new methodology for learning a foreign language, to start writing a novel in it.
Цей роман назва «Мандарин. Пісні про смерть і любов». Він українською вийшов у 18-му році, вже за рік був зроблений переклад, і наразі цей роман існує англійською мовою, виданий Гарвардським університетом.
So this was my novel Mondegreen, Songs of Death and Love, and which I came out in Ukrainian in 2018, and in a year it was translated and published by Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute into English.
Ну і наразі завдяки, знову ж таки, Російській Федерації, бачите, я не лаюсь, я тільки дякую росіянам. Написано мною більше українською мовою, ніж я написав за весь час, за все своє життя російською.
So once again, thank you to the Russian Federation. You see, I'm not upset at them. I'm actually thanking them. So thank you, the Russian Federation, for making me write in Ukrainian, because at this point I wrote more in Ukrainian than I ever wrote in Russian.
Ну, і останнє, я не міг би повірити в це навіть вже в 14-му, 20-му році. Вони досвідом мого перебування в окупації між Бучою і Бородянкою в 22-му році змусили мене перетворитися на драматурга. Я написав 1 п'єсу, вона англійською вже видана, і 2 п'єси українською я видаю в цьому році, що буде.
And then the next occupation I was under when I was between Bucha and Borodyanka actually made me a dramaturg. So I wrote a play about my experience, which I believe you'll be able to purchase afterwards. Sorry, that's for me. And I already, finished 2 other plays in Ukrainian that are about to be published.
Thank you. One thing that stood out to me as I was reading, especially Olia's memoir and the Crimean Tatar collection, was that despite the very distressing nature of a lot of the subject matter, there was a very intense, very sensual, very joyous appreciation for the natural world, for plants, for smells, for food, for the Black Sea in particular. And I was wondering if either of you could reflect on that sort of celebration of beauty in the midst of natural beauty in particular, in the midst of these really terrible sort of historical tribulations, both past and now present.
That's something that we also discussed with Alim Aliyev just a couple of days ago. And I did share a couple of these stories with my students, and they also noticed this kind of theme that there is this appreciation for nature and longing for nature. And we were trying to somehow decipher what this kind of bond exists, what this kind of bond means, particularly today in a very technological and globalized world. I checked this kind of thought with Alim Aliyev as well. And we arrived at this conclusion that for Crimean Tatars, the land is their essential element and is their element of existence. It's an existential issue for them. Because starting with the deportation of 1944, there is this persistent longing to be back, not only because they left a lot of personal things behind, but because they really saw themselves as being part of that land, being part of that sea, if you wish, being part of that air, if you wish. While being deprived of that opportunity to live in that kind of place, of course, this triggers this resistance against the occupation and this resistance against the authorities that actually kill this kind of bond that gives life to the entire nation, if we can put it this way. And Alim Aliyev also confirmed that yes, indeed. Being part of Crimea is being part of nation, and being in the peninsula means to be alive, in fact. It's just part of their worldview, it's part of their nature, and it's part of their history and culture. Again, it's not that everything can be politicized, but also this Russian presence somehow not only transforms, distorts, but kills this bond with the land. And it's not something that just transpired in 2014, but Arkhangel Krymsky, one of the famous Ukrainian writers who actually didn't have a drop of Ukrainian blood, as he mentioned in his letters, he also, back at the beginning of the 20th century, confirmed during his research that the flourishing of the Crimean Tatar literature that took place between the 15th and 17th centuries stopped with the arrival of the Russian presence. And the peninsula was first annexed back in 1783. And after that, the presence of Crimean Tatars in the peninsula was decreased considerably, either through cultural efforts or through political efforts. And that was one of the reasons why many Crimean Tatars felt like the 19th century was the black century, or the dark century as they describe it, because for the first time they realized they were outnumbered by the Russians. In 1944, of course, the presence of Crimean Tatars dropped actually to zero. So this connection to the land is existential, and I can but mention this one story that once I read about one of the Crimean Tatars who wanted to return to Crimea, but because of the Soviet regime policy, he couldn't. But as soon as it became possible to come back sometime in the 60s or 70s, he was in fact arrested and sent back to Central Asia. So then after that arrest and after he was sent back to Central Asia, he came back again to Crimea, to the Crimea. Then he was sent back to Central Asia again. And after that, he came back to Crimea again. Unfortunately, he had to commit suicide as a gesture of resistance because he wasn't given any permission to have his settlement there legally. That's again that this story continues to repeat itself, although no story repeats itself in 100% accuracy, but still still it's this kind of existential issue that is manifested through this very deep connection with the land. And the last thing I want to say is that unlike for those who come to the Crimea, this peninsula is not exoticized for Crimean Tatars. And of course, well, there are poems here in this collection that celebrate the beauty of the peninsula, but there is no sense of exoticization that would be felt somehow in those poems that were written by Russian poets as well.
Thank you.
I want to continue on this idea of Ukrainians, like Crimean Tatars, very connected to their land. So for my parents, for example, they moved into a new house, still in Kakhovka, almost 30 years ago. And, they built this house, but actually the most important thing for them, I think, was the stuff that was surrounding the house. So my dad dug up a pond, my mom created a vegetable garden, they planted some orchard trees and pine trees, and my dad, put some grapevines in, and it was just this beautiful oasis of a place. And I've heard them speak about it, now 2 years ago, but since they've lost the house, they said, you know what, it doesn't matter if the house is destroyed. If we do come back and there's no walls, that's fine. We can rebuild that. We'll actually build something smaller, so it's better for us to live there in old age. But what really broke their heart is just thinking about the garden and what's happening to it. That's how close, that's how essential it is to their existence and their identity and their memory. And I think for my mom, who is in Berlin now, and she's safe, she has her nephew and her niece there who are taking care of her. And but every spring and every summer, her mental health just completely goes down, because she's thinking, okay, now I would be looking through the seed packets, and now I would be planting, or now I would be doing this, and now the first flowers will be coming up. And I think that's what really kills her. Like I actually try not to even remember our place, or online, if I post anything on Instagram, I'm always just thinking, oh gosh, to make sure not to post anything about the gardens or something like that. And through my own experience, so I left Ukraine when I was 12, almost 13, and we did live in Cyprus for 5 years. And then I went to the UK when I was 18 to study at a university. And I realized when I started writing my first cookbook, Mamushka, in 2015, I started writing it. I just realized that I had two pairs of eyes, that I had the pair of eyes of a little Ukrainian girl that grew up there. And actually, I didn't appreciate that beauty, or, it was just normal. You're just running around in the summer and there's apricots falling on your head, or you come back home and your feet are covered black because you're just running through these mulberry, like all of these mulberries lying on the floor. And when I lived in the UK, I looked at myself through these British pair of eyes, where a tiny punnet of these raspberries costs an arm and a leg, and it's, and I suddenly had this realization, and perhaps I do romanticize it a little bit, because obviously it's through the eyes of a child that I remember my hometown, especially in the summer, I think, when there is this abundance of fruit and there is sunshine and it's really beautiful. Yeah, and I just realized how much we had and how much we could lose, and how much we did lose in the end. So I guess that's my take on it.
Thank you. And there's a story in the Crimean Tatar collection that I particularly liked, that I thought resonated really, really beautifully with your book, Olia, as well. That's called The Walnut Tree and the Geranium. And it's the story of a Crimean Tatar woman who goes to visit a Crimean Tatar friend who lives in a Crimean Tatar community in Bulgaria that has been sort of in exile for a very long time. And she says, oh, what do you need me to bring you to Bulgaria? And the friend says, bring me 2 walnut trees and a bag of topsoil. And of course, this is quite difficult to bring across an international border, but the woman does it for her friend, right? She understands, and it turns out that her friend in Bulgaria wants to scatter this earth onto the graves of her ancestors, and then to plant these young walnut trees from Crimea, right? It has to be from Crimea, and I think that has a new power and resonance given what's happened most recently in Ukraine. I think that might be a natural place to stop. Does anyone have Q&A? Would anyone like to make any last remarks or last comments? No? Okay.
Я хочу подякувати Разом і Маші хочу подякувати. Я хочу всіх вислухали, що це люди, котрі допомагають мені на перший рік. Я дуже вдячний. Хай живе Разом. Маша, дякую.
Volodymyr just would like to thank Razom.
And Maria, specifically Maria, yeah. And we will all thank Razom for organizing this wonderful event, and Maria for having such good taste in literature.
Please come to other events too, because there's also going to be Maria Reva meeting, and she's a Booker long-listed writer this year who was born in Ukraine, and I'm promoting because I'm moderating it on October 29th. So please check it out and seek it out. Sorry, Sophia.
Wonderful. Okay, we have time for questions from the audience now. I see one in the back there.
Hi, добрий вечір. Вітаю. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you with the difficulties that you had with learning the language. That was quite a feat. Pani Natalia, I don't know if you had any difficulty. I don't remember if you mentioned what your experience was with language.
Well, I didn't have any difficulty because I grew up being bilingual.
Okay. One thing I just wanted to add, and maybe you can comment further on it. My own family comes from a village in western Ukraine. They never spoke Russian. When I was there, still in the Soviet times, whenever somebody approached them speaking Russian, my aunts would look at them, stare at them blankly, not understanding a word that they were saying. So, you know, I wanted to emphasize that in the villages, and I think somebody had mentioned that, the language of Ukraine was preserved. It was there, it was very much alive, and it was pervasive, you know, it was everywhere. So that was you know, kind of a note that I wanted to add, and perhaps somebody can comment further on that. You knew the language, you were brought up with it, the other two were not. And I appreciate that, and I've heard that from so many people who have who were living in Ukraine once the invasion began, who made a point of learning the language, the Ukrainian language, and just you know, as an argument against the invaders. And they're very successful, and I think that's a very brilliant thing to do. So thank you very much for your input on that.
Any other questions, comments?
Good evening. I'm the son of a woman who immigrated from Ireland in 1949, and Gaelic was her first language, and many times she would speak in that with her sisters. So not understanding it nor speaking it, I fully sympathize with you. This is in part a question to our moderator here. I know that Elena Zelenska has been very forthright in wanting to get books written in Ukrainian both into the United States, into Western Europe. Are any of you involved with her, or is this esteemed institution, which is the New York Public Library, with that? That's number one. Number two, I'm actually going to be doing some fundraising on behalf of a clinic in the west of Ukraine called the Bojo Clinic. They do not have the support like Superunions, which does prosthetics. They're doing neurological repair on frontline troops. They're doing a lot of PTSD support, and I'd like to maybe speak with you afterward to see how maybe we can collaborate. It's going to be quite a challenge. I'm going to be cycling from New York to Cleveland, Cleveland to Indianapolis, meeting with Victoria Spartz, who's the U.S. Congresswoman, then from there to Toronto to our colleagues in the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, and then back to New York. Thank you very much.
I'm trying to think who from Razom should speak to you after the event, but somebody will find you. Thank you very much for that contribution, because yes, we actually have a health program helping a lot of hospitals in Ukraine, and we'd love to talk to you.
And we have time for just one more question. So,
And please question.
but it has to be a good question. Do I see hands?
Thank you very much for a wonderful series of talks. I was a journalist. I lived in Ukraine for a couple of years. When we're talking about Russian occupation, I've often thought one of the undercovered or understudied crimes of the occupation is the forced mobilization, especially of young Ukrainian men, into the Russian armed forces. I just wondered if any of your communities had been personally affected by that, or if you could use this as an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about how this particular issue affects occupied Ukraine.
Ну, я можу сказати трішечки про ситуацію в Донецьку і в Аріалі, тому що ми зберігаємо певні контакти з цими людьми. Я сказав?
Yes, he's going to be able to tell you a little bit what's happening in Donetsk.
І ясно, що на цих територіях більша частина чоловічого, населення, здатного взяти зброю в руці, знищена. Причому примусово. Є окремі випадки, коли за допомогою грошей чи зв'язків, чи дійсно дуже поганого стану здоров'я, людині вдавалося уникнути цієї примусової мобілізації. Але це дуже нечасті випадки.
On these territories that I'm familiar with under occupation, majority of the male population has been wiped out because it's very difficult to avoid mobilization, and the few cases, usually somebody is really sick, so they avoid it, and sometimes they bribe, the authorities in charge of the occupation land, but majority of the people have been drafted.
Я міг би розказати, але, мабуть, на офіційному заході я не маю права розказувати деталі якісь. Просто легше виживає чоловіче населення в містах, де воно може ховатися буквально роками під ліжками своїх старих батьків.
I mean, I have some examples that I don't want to put on camera for, but it's easier to avoid the draft if you're in the city, because then you can hide with your parents, let's say your elderly parents, and there's always a bed that you can crawl under.
А в маленьких містечках, таких, нібито селах, дуже часто позалишалися тільки старі бабці і жінки.
And in the smaller villages and the small towns, usually the grandmothers and the women that remained.
Ну і відомо, що вони, тобто маю на увазі окупаційну владу, активно готують буквально дітей до того, що вони будуть змушені, брати зброю в руки. Їх починають готувати буквально з 13-14 років.
The occupation authorities really stress that the children will need to go fight, and they start preparing them from like 13-14-year-old.
Я знаю, що вони викрали з територій Східної України, я думаю, біля 100 тисяч дітей. І значна частина з них, як мені здається, навіть більше, це саме хлопці, котрі зараз утримуються в спеціальних лагерях, таборах, в котрих їх готують до війни. Причому примусове і в дуже людських умовах існування.
By some estimation, 100,000 of children were stolen from the East Ukraine, and majority of them are teenage boys, and they do go to these like special camps that are not the great condition camps, but they're kind of prepared to then go back and fight in the wars.
Я спілкувався з людиною, що спілкувалася з таким хлопцем, що збіг з такого табору. І він розказував, цей хлопець, як їх там отримували, як знущалися, і як їх змушували, значить, ввечері співати навіть не гімн цей, значить, Росії, а от цю пісню, що мене дуже вразила. «Как хорошо, что все мы здесь сегодня собрались». Це, к слову, про велику російську культуру. Ну, хто розуміє, про що я?
So the one story that I heard is about the boy that escaped such a camp, and he was telling the story of how they were made to sing songs, and not just like the Russian official kind of anthem, but actually these romantic 1960s, bard songs that go, how wonderful that we're all gathered here, and we're all together.
I would like just to follow up a little bit on what just Volodymyr said about militarization of children. I don't have anything to add to what you asked about forced mobilization of adults, but for children, it's a real problem that we will have to deal with in the future, because what Volodymyr just described is really preparing these children to defend Russia in the future. And they instilled with hostility not only toward Ukraine, but everything that goes against the current regimes in Russia ideology. And it might seem that it's something secret or something not quite open. It's all open. It's all overt. There are all websites that show how they recruit children, where they re-educate them, where they indoctrinate them into this Russian ideology. And I can name right now two organizations, the Warrior, that by the way was sanctioned because of the activities that they organize and manage. That's one, and another one, the movement of the first, Движение Первых, that are organizing their centers in all occupied territories of Ukraine, because all these territories, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, are viewed by Russians as the territory of Russia. Crimea 2014, since 2014, and all other territories since 2022. That means that they implement all the educational principles that have been circulating in Russia since Putin came to power back in 2000 almost. And now they are indoctrinating Ukrainian children into all those ideas that Russian children already absorbed, and now not only Russian children, but Russian generation that can go to the front line at the point. And that's quite disturbing, because if adults can hide, children cannot hide. They cannot hide their mentality, they cannot hide their knowledge, because they don't have that knowledge yet. But they receive this kind of Russian propaganda, if you prefer this word. I personally do not use Russian propaganda anymore. That's Russian worldview right now concerning Ukraine in general. And children grow up with this kind of understanding of what Ukraine is, or in actually what Ukraine never existed in this kind of ideology. And to re-educate them in the future, it would be particularly difficult. And then, well, I ask myself this question, what kind of environment is being created right now for Ukraine for years to come? So this will be groups, communities that don't see Ukraine as independent, point one. Point two, they don't see Ukraine as a real state in general. And Ukrainians are presented through these programs only as quote-unquote neo-Nazis and fascists. So that's just a follow-up on what Volodymyr said in terms of this problem, in terms of mobilization, because these children will be mobilized in the future, and they are educated with this kind of understanding that it's the greatest honor to die for Russia. And this is not a joke. This is something that is written in the official documents. And this is something that is delivered to children, not even when they turn 14 or 15. There are corners, like when we used to have them during the Soviet regime, red corners for kindergartens, for children who are 3 or 4. And that's how their mentality is being shaped right now. So that's a huge issue for future discussion and for future consideration.
Just wanted to add quickly about the general glamorization of militarization within Russia as well at the moment. If you ever watch the Russian channels on 9th of May, so Victory Day, there are mothers that have prams that they've kind of papier-mâchéed into these tanks, and their kids, you know, under 1 or whatever, are wearing the Soviet military uniforms. They have a park, you know, kind of like a Disneyland type thing, where, you know, the attractions are all of these massive weapons. Like, it was mad during the Soviet Union, the level of militarization and glorification of the victory and everything else. But right now, it's gone to a next level. They call it победобесие, so kind of like victory mongering. Yeah, it's really surreal. I sometimes, you know, I have to pinch myself when I see this, and I'm just like, this can't be. How can this be?
Which is your first Ukrainian thought, also.
Yeah. I just keep asking myself that.
Yeah, it's actually a very profound philosophical thought, I think, your first Ukrainian thought. Well, I guess, unfortunately, we'll have to end there. But I want to thank you for including me in this wonderful event. It was such a pleasure to talk to you and especially to read your work. So as I understand, the books that we've discussed will be for sale. And I will say from my experience of recently reading them that they are all very beautiful and very powerful testaments, I think, to various forms of resilience and celebration of the cultures of Ukraine, plural, despite all of the suffering that is going on at the moment. So I hope that you will read them and learn from them and enjoy them.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you for moderating so well.